Hello, my name is Sophie Edwards, and today I'll be talking to you about the world of worm charming. What is worm charming? Worm charming has many names: fiddling, grunting, snoring, depending on one's technique. In its most basic sense, worm charming is any method that uses vibrations to coax and encourage worms to the surface, where they can be caught and most often used for fishing bait. While digging in the ground is a valid way to find worms, it is not considered worm charming. While worm charming takes more time and effort than buying bait from a store, it is free. Charming techniques were popular among fishermen, saving them some change and a trip to the store. Furthermore, most will agree that worm charming is a fun time and very rewarding. A person's first time experiencing worm charming may seem like magic as the worms pop out of the ground. The origins of worm charming are unknown, but the tradition has been around for a long time, especially in the southern United States, where techniques continue to be passed down from generation to generation. That said, worm charming is not as well known as it used to be. While the creation of worm charming competitions has encouraged younger generations to partake and even create their own methods, the number of people who can charm worms is still relatively low. Worm charming comes in many different forms, using a variety of tools and instruments to call forth the worms. The most simple technique is twanging, where a garden fork is partially stuck into the ground and wiggled back and forth and/or hit it with a stick. Another popular method is fiddling. A long wooden pole is driven into the ground, then the charmer moves a handsaw back and forth across the top of the pole, mimicking the motions of playing a fiddle or violin. There is also the traditional technique of groaning or snoring. Similar to fiddling, a wooden pole is pounded into the ground, but instead of using a saw, metal strips or the head of an axe is run across the wood to create vibrations. The resulting noise sounds like a person grunting or snoring, depending on the charmer's exact methods. While traditional methods are tried and true, innovation can be found throughout the worm charming community. The aim of most worm charmers is to use their created vibrations to mimic the sound of rain, which drives worms up to the surface to avoid flooded tunnels. But some decided to make it rain for themselves and will pour water or other liquids on the ground to catch their worms. A uniquely modern approach to worm charming is the McClock technique. This technique uses a chainsaw without the cutting chain, which is then placed on top of a submerged wooden pole or directly onto the ground itself. Finally, there are a number of truly artistic techniques that involve music or dancing. Speakers playing loud music of all sorts, from rock and roll to classic symphonies to techno, have been used to coax out worms. Others prefer to make their own music using drums, horns or woodwinds to charm their worms. Others still will put on a different kind of performance and dance on top of the ground. Tap dancing on a wooden board is most commonly used as it creates the strongest vibrations through dance numbers, though dance numbers are at the charmer's discretion. There are three main worm charming competitions: the World Worm Charming Championships, the International Festival of Worm Charming, and the Worm Grunting Festival. While each competition has their own rules and regulations, each competition follows the same basic setup. Competitors are assigned to a plot of ground to charm their worms from and a set amount of time to collect their worms. The worms are then counted and a winner is declared. The World Worm Charming Championships started in 1980 at the local primary school in Williston, Cheshire, in the northwest of England. This competition is considered to be the first worm charming competition with strict rules and guidelines. The WWCC rules are the most common rules used in smaller worm charming competitions. Every year, 2 trophies are given out. The golden worm goes to the charmer who collected the most worms that year, while the silver worm is awarded to whoever charmed the heaviest worm, the record currently being 12.08 grams. The Williston competition started strong, with Mr. Tom Shufflebotham setting the initial record of raising 511 worms, a record that has not been beaten for almost 30 years. The rival worm charming competitions to the World Worm Charming Championships is the International Festival of Worm Charming in Blackerton, Devon, in southern England. Also making its debut in the 80s, the Blackerton competition differs from the Wollaston competition, most notably in its use of liquids. Supposedly, the International Festival of Worm Charming was started after a local man relieved himself in a field after one too many pints and was amazed as worms wiggled up to the surface. The current rules of the competition state that any liquid can be used as long as the competitor takes a swig of it first, to prevent any dangerous mixtures from being used. International Festival of Worm Charming is also rife with cheating through the use of black market worms. Across the pond is the Worm Grunting Festival, held in Sopchoppy, Florida, since 2000. Part of the festival includes a ball in which two people are named the Wall Grunting King and Queen. Finally, an honourable mention goes out to the Great Canadian Worm Charming Championship in Shelburne, Ontario in Canada, which does not appear to hold competitions on a regular basis. I'm now going to delve deeper into the rules of the World Worm Charming Championships, as they are the most widely used rules. Most of the rules pertain to the basic setup of the competition. Competitors have a half hour to raise as many worms as possible, the winner being the person with the most worms. Competitors are given a 3x3 metre plot to charm their worms from, and can only use the worms from that plot. Digging is not allowed, and all equipment must be handled safely. Not everybody wants to touch their worms, so a second person, called a gilly, is allowed to handle the worms for them. One of the most important rules is keeping the competition drug-free. The competition considers water to be a drug stimulant and does not allow it or any other liquids to be used. The final rule is that all worms collected during the competition are released in the evening after the competition to prevent them from being eaten by worms. I'm going to conclude this lecture by discussing the world champion worm charmer Sophie Smith. Sophie set the world record for the number of worms charmed at the World Worm Charming Championships in 2009, when she was only 10 years old. Sophie collected 576 worms using the traditional twagging method and has her name in the Guinness World Records.